The problem, my dear friends, was not the governesses. I know exactly what you are thinking. 14 months, 12 women, 12 very capable women who arrived at Moorfield Hall in the north of England with impeccable references and sensible shoes and left, some quietly, some less so, citing the same cause in essentially the same words. The child. Violet Trelawney was 8 years old. 9 by the time this story becomes interesting. She had dark eyes that tracked adults with the patient, measuring attention of someone who had decided long ago that most of what grown people said was decorative rather than informative. She corrected her French tutor's subjunctive in February. She asked the vicar, in front of the entire household, why the Book of Job raised questions that the sermon did not answer. She had been described, across 14 months and 12 letters of resignation, as difficult, unsettling, precocious, and, most damning, in the vocabulary of 1849, too much. But the problem was not Violet. The problem was how her father had been explaining her. Lord Adrian Trelawney, Viscount of Moorfield, was not a man who inspected himself closely. He was thorough in everything else: the estate, the tenants, the accounts, the management of a house that had run at roughly half its former warmth since Lady Trelawney had died 3 years prior. He was conscientious. He was not unkind. He was in the specific way of a man who has been managing grief by staying very busy, not particularly aware of what was happening in the rooms he was not standing in. He interviewed the governesses himself. This was Mr. Radcliffe, his steward, a composed man with 22 years in the household, who had stopped voicing opinions around the 6th interview, not because he had run out of them, had privately concluded, the source of the difficulty. Not the interviewing itself, the description. Lord Trelawney described his daughter the same way in every interview: intelligent, spirited, in need of firm, consistent, patient guidance. The governesses nodded and said they understood, and then they met Violet, and discovered that intelligent meant she would dismantle your lesson plan before you had finished presenting it, that spirited meant she had once locked the library door from the inside and spent an entire afternoon reading in peace, and that firm, consistent, patient guidance meant something rather different in practice than it did in description. By the 12th interview, Mr. Radcliffe had begun noting the date and the duration in his household ledger with the resigned precision of a man keeping records for posterity. The 13th candidate arrived on a Thursday in October. Her name was Miss Rosalind Paget. She came recommended by the agency with a brief note that Mr. Radcliffe read twice, then set on Lord Trelawney's desk without comment. It said only, "She has not left a position because of a child." Lord Trelawney read it once. He was not a man who invested heavily in the suggestions of employment agencies. He was also, after 12 interviews, a man with limited remaining options, which is a condition that produces a specific, grudging kind of open-mindedness. Miss Paget arrived 20 minutes early. This in itself was not notable. What was notable was what she did with the 20 minutes. Mr. Radcliffe, who had been watching from the upper corridor window with the professional neutrality he applied to everything, observed her walk directly to the east garden, where Violet was engaged in her Thursday afternoon occupation of examining the stone wall for evidence of what she called old things. Miss Paget stood at the gate for a moment, then went in. He watched them talk for 16 minutes. He timed it. When Miss Paget was shown into Lord Trelawney's study, she sat in the chair across from his desk with the composed attention of someone who had already gathered the information she needed and was now waiting to see what else she might learn. Lord Trelawney began the interview. He was 3 sentences in: the household, the position, the scope of instruction expected, when she said, "Before you continue, my lord, may I ask you something?" He stopped. In 12 interviews, no one had asked him anything for at least 20 minutes. "Go on," he said. "Your daughter," she said, "has been conducting a systematic survey of the east garden wall for at least a season. She has found 3 carved dates, 2 sets of initials, and what she believes is a mason's mark from the 14th century. She documented them in a notebook she made herself." A pause. Did you know that? He looked at her. He said no. She told me in the first 5 minutes. Miss Paget held his gaze steadily. She also told me the names of the last 4 governesses, what they taught her, what they refused to teach her, and why she thought each of them left. Another pause. She was precise about all of it. She was not unkind. Lord Trelawney was quiet. You have described this position, Miss Paget said, with the careful directness of someone who has decided that kindness and clarity are not mutually exclusive, as requiring someone to manage a difficult child. I spent 16 minutes with her. She is not a difficult child. She is an exceptionally capable one who has been given tasks designed for someone considerably less capable, and she has responded the way any reasonable person would respond to that situation. Which is, he said, by refusing to pretend the tasks are adequate. The study was very still. Outside, October was doing what October does in the north of England, which is to make everything both beautiful and faintly melancholy at the same time. Lord Trelawney looked at the woman across his desk. In 12 interviews he had received many things: assurances, references, carefully worded answers to carefully worded questions. He had not received this. You are saying, he said, that the problem is not Violet. The problem, Miss Paget said, with the patience of someone who is not trying to win an argument but to correct a course, is that your daughter has been described for 14 months as a problem. And she knows it, and she has decided that if she is going to be a problem regardless, she might as well be one on her own terms. She folded her hands in her lap. That is not a character flaw, my lord. That is logic. He looked at her for a long moment. He thought, 12 interviews. No one said this. He thought, she said it in 4 minutes. He thought, either this woman is exactly right, or she has made a very confident error, and I need to determine which. What would you do differently? He said. She regarded him with the assessing quality of someone deciding whether the question was genuine. She decided it was. I would teach her what she is actually capable of learning, she said. Natural philosophy. History from primary sources, not summaries. Latin properly, not the simplified version. Mathematics to the level she can reach, which is likely further than you have been told. A pause, and I would ask her about the Mason's mark, because she has a theory, and it is not a bad one. Before you hear what Lord Trelawney said next, my dear friends, and if you are settled in and finding this story worth your Thursday evening, I would be grateful if you'd consider finding the subscribe button. It is a small thing, and it helps me keep the fire going, and the stories coming. Now, where were we? When can you start? Lord Trelawney said. Something moved in Miss Paget's expression, brief, carefully managed, the particular quality of relief in someone who had prepared for a harder answer. Monday, she said, if that suits. Monday suits, he paused. Miss Paget. My lord. The previous governesses, the descriptions they gave of my daughter. He looked at his desk. I did not question them. She held his gaze evenly. No, she said, you did not. A silence. I should have. Yes, she said, you should have. She left. Mr. Radcliffe appeared in the doorway, with the expression of a man who had been in the adjacent corridor, and was not going to pretend otherwise. Lord Trelawney said, without looking up, not a word. Mr. Radcliffe said, of course, my lord, a pause. She starts Monday. She starts Monday. Mr. Radcliffe withdrew with the satisfied composure of a man whose one-line agency note had been thoroughly justified. He was, Lord Trelawney reflected, going to find a way to be right about this for a very long time. Miss Paget was, as she had implied she would be, effective. This was not precisely a surprise. Her references had been excellent, and the interview had suggested someone who understood the difference between knowing a thing and teaching it. What was a surprise, or at least a thing he had not anticipated, was the speed. By the end of the first week, Violet had stopped eating her meals in her room. By the end of the second, she had started appearing in the corridor, outside Lord Trelawney's study in the evenings, with the tentative quality of someone who is not quite sure of her welcome, but has decided the inquiry is worth the risk. He opened the door on a Wednesday and found her standing there with a notebook and the expression of a person who has a question and is not certain it will be well received. Miss Paget says the Romans had a word for the kind of wall the East Garden has, Violet said. She says you might know what it is. He did not know what it was. He said he would look into it. She nodded with the serious precision she applied to all transactions and went back upstairs. He looked into it. He found the answer in 20 minutes. He left a note outside the schoolroom door the following morning. There was a note back by afternoon. It said, "That is correct. Miss Paget says there is a book in the library that has drawings. May I borrow it? V." He sent the book. He received it back 5 days later with a folded piece of paper tucked inside, which contained a sketch of the East Garden wall with annotations, and at the bottom, "The initials are probably from 1683. Miss Paget showed me how to compare letter forms. Thank you for the book. Violet." He read the note 3 times. He went and found Mr. Radcliffe and said, "The child has been annotating Roman wall typology." Mr. Radcliffe said, "Yes, my lord, and apparently she has a hypothesis about the foundation stones that she intends to present formally on Friday." Lord Trelawney looked at him. "She's presenting formally." Miss Paget suggested it. A pause. Violet apparently took to the idea. Lord Trelawney attended the Friday presentation. He sat in the chair that'd been placed in the schoolroom for him, not the small wooden ones, while his 9-year-old daughter stood at a board she had written on herself and presented, for 27 minutes, a structured argument about the probable construction date of the East Garden wall with comparative references and a sketch diagram. He did not say very much during it, because there was not very much to say. She was thorough. Her reasoning was careful. When he asked one question, about the mason's mark, she answered it with the particular contained pleasure of someone who has been waiting for that exact question. He looked at Miss Paget, who was sitting to the side with the expression of a person watching something go exactly as she had expected. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them needed to. He began reading the weekly reports differently after that. Miss Paget sent them every Monday. 3 pages, clear and specific, organized by subject, and then by what Violet had found interesting versus merely adequate. He had been reading them as administrative documents. Around the 4th week, he realized he was reading them as something else, not because of what they reported, though the reporting was precise, because of how they thought. The report on the Latin did not say Violet is progressing well. It said, "She is drilling the declensions not because she finds them interesting, but because she has understood that they are the price of entry to the texts she actually wants to read, and she is paying that price efficiently." He had never received a report that described a child's motivation that precisely. He wrote back as he always did, with responses and questions. She wrote back to his questions with answers that were always exactly the right length. Not short enough to seem dismissive, not long enough to seem like performance, and the unmenthought the right length, because she had thought carefully about what the question was actually asking. He found, around the 6th week, that he was looking forward to Mondays. This was a thing he examined with the moderate discomfort of a man who has a sense of where an examination might lead. He set the examination aside. He continued reading the reports. He continued writing responses. He continued attending the Friday presentations, which had become, without formal announcement, a fixture of the household schedule. On the Thursday of the 7th week, he went to the library at 8:30 in the evening to find a specific volume on Northern English estates, and found the room already occupied. Violet was asleep in the large chair by the fireplace, covered by a blanket that had not been in the library before tonight. Miss Paget was in the adjacent chair, not asleep, reading by the fire with the focused, unhurried attention she brought to everything. She heard him in the doorway and looked up. "My lord." "Miss Paget," he came in. She fell asleep. "About an hour ago. We had finished the chapter, and she said she would rest her eyes for a moment." A pause, with a brief quality of dry amusement at the corner of her mouth. She has been resting them quite thoroughly since. He looked at Violet, at his daughter, asleep in the firelight, with the relaxed, uncomplicated expression of a child who is genuinely comfortable. It was an expression he had not seen on her face in 3 years. "She has not slept in the library before," he said. "No," Miss Paget agreed. "I think she has not felt easy enough in any room to fall asleep accidentally in it before." He stood there for a moment. He thought about 12 interviews. He thought about 14 months of reports that said difficult and spirited and requiring firm guidance. He thought about a 9-year-old who had annotated Roman wall typology and presented it formally and asked, with the careful precision she brought to all requests, whether she might borrow the book. "Miss Paget," he said. "My lord." The characterizations in the previous reports, difficult, requiring management. He looked at Violet. None of them were describing the child I have been seeing for the past 7 weeks. "No," she said. "They were describing their own discomfort with a child who knew more than they found comfortable to be known." He was quiet for a moment. "Why did you see it differently?" She considered this. Not quickly. She did not produce quick answers to real questions. "Because I did not go into the East Garden to manage her," she said finally. "I went in because she was there and the interview was not for another 20 minutes, and I was curious what she was doing." A pause. "She was more interesting than anything I expected to find." He looked at her then. In the firelight with his daughter, asleep between them, he looked at the woman who had said in 4 minutes what no one had said in 14 months, and he thought, she said it not because it was the correct professional thing to say. She said it because she had actually looked. "I have been reading the Monday reports," he said, "with more attention than is strictly administrative." She was very still. "Not because of the content," he said, "though the content is excellent, because of the person writing it." The fire said what fires say in moments like this, which is nothing helpful. Outside the library window, November was conducting its business. "I am aware," he said, "that this is outside the scope of our professional arrangement. I am also aware that it has been outside that scope for some weeks, and the awareness has not changed the fact of it." She looked at the fire for a long moment, then she said carefully, "It does not create a difficulty, my lord." "No?" "It creates a question." She looked at him. "What you intend to do with it?" He thought about this. "I intend," he said, "to continue exactly as I have been, to read the Monday reports and attend the Friday presentations and look into things that Violet asks about, and perhaps to stop pretending that the attention is entirely on her behalf." Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. "That is a restrained intention." "I am working within the situation as it is," he said. "The situation includes the position you hold and the fact that I have recently conducted 12 interviews and would prefer not to conduct a 13th. She looked at Violet, still sleeping. "I came to Moorfield Hall," she said, "because the agency note said there was a child no one could reach. I had been in 3 positions before this one. In all 3 of them I saw things that needed saying and did not say them because the cost of saying them seemed too high." She paused. "I decided, before I came to this house, that I was not going to do that anymore. The cost being the position. The cost being whatever it was." She looked at him directly. "What I did not know when I made that decision was that the man I would be saying true things to would turn out to be the sort of man who finds them useful rather than inconvenient." He held her gaze, and after 7 weeks. "After 7 weeks," she said, "I have found no evidence that he is not." The library was quiet. Violet slept. November continued outside. "Miss Paget," he said. "My lord. Have dinner with me tomorrow evening. Not as the governess and the household. As the person who went into the East Garden and found the mason's mark worth knowing about." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "The staff will notice." "Yes." "It will produce questions." "Yes." He did not look away. "You are further up my list of concerns than the staff's questions." She looked at Violet once more, then she picked up her book. "Friday," she said, "after the presentation." After the presentation, he agreed. He left the library. He thought as he walked down the corridor. After the presentation, he thought. That is tomorrow, he thought. That is the shortest distance I have waited across in some time. He was right about that. The Friday dinners became Friday dinners. This was not announced. It simply became the shape of things, in the way that the right arrangements settle into place, without requiring formal declaration. He talked about the estate, the real version, the tenants, the complications, the things that were working and the things that were not, and the specific difficulty of making decisions that affected people whose lives he could see from the upper windows of Moorfield Hall, and was responsible for in ways he had never found adequate words for. She listened with the focused, connecting attention he had first encountered at the East Garden Gate, the attention of someone following the reasoning and seeing where it went. She had thoughts about the Northfield tenant situation that were more useful than his land agents. He told her so. She said, I know. He said she could have the grace to be modest about it. She said she saved her grace for things she was uncertain about. Are you ever uncertain? He said. She thought about it seriously. About facts, she said, rarely. About people, more often. People are harder to read than primary sources. What are you uncertain about with people, at present? She looked at him across the dinner table. Nothing, she said. He held the look. Good, he said. She smiled. The full version, which he had been collecting, since the Garden and the Mason's Mark, with the attention of someone who understands that certain things are worth noting carefully. It changed her face entirely. He thought, I am going to spend a considerable amount of effort in pursuit of that smile, and I do not find that a difficult prospect. He was right about that too. On the Friday of the 12th week, he said, at the end of the evening, I want to talk about the arrangement. She was very still. Not to change it, he said quickly. To say that I am not sure the current words for it are accurate. She looked at him with the assessing quality that was her most serious mode. The arrangement is working, she said. Yes. He looked at the dinner table, the two places that had been one place since his wife died, before Violet started sleeping through evenings in the library, and the Monday reports became the thing he looked forward to most about Mondays. I want to add to it. What would you add? He was quiet for a moment. I want to add that the woman who walked into the East Garden 16 minutes before her interview and found out what no one had thought to find out in 14 months is someone I do not want to not have in this house, and that the words employer and governess do not describe what Friday evenings have been for the past 12 weeks. He paused, and that I am aware of how complicated that is, and that I would like to work on the complication, if you are willing. She looked at the table. She said, You are asking me to stay. I am asking you to stay, he said. And eventually, not now, eventually, I am asking you to stay in the way that would make the complications considerably more manageable. She was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that is not managed but actual. I corrected you, she said, in the interview. 4 minutes in. You hired me for it. I hired you because it was the truest thing anyone had said to me in 14 months. He held her gaze. I would like you to keep saying true things in this house. She looked at him. She said yes. He breathed. She said, Violet is going to have thoughts. Violet is going to have a great many thoughts, he agreed. And she will organize them into a formal presentation, and it will be thorough and well-sourced, and we will listen to all of it. Something happened at the corner of her mouth. That is probably right. It is entirely right, he said. I have been paying attention. The arrangement was revised accordingly. Violet did, as predicted, have thoughts. She had them in writing, which she placed on Lord Trelawney's desk on a Saturday morning, with the composed formality she had brought to every significant communication since the East Garden Wall presentation. The document was 3 pages. The handwriting was careful. The title, at the top of the first page, read, Proposed Amendments to the Household Arrangement, a Formal Submission by Miss Violet Trelawney. Lord Trelawney read it. It covered, in order, her conditions for accepting the revision to the household structure, her expectations for how the situation would be conducted, her concerns about potential disruption to the schoolroom schedule, and a final section titled Benefits as I Understand Them, which was, he found, both more generous and more precise than anything he could have written himself. At the bottom, in the slightly larger handwriting she used for important conclusions, it said, I have known since the second Friday that this was likely. I calculated that if it happened, it would be better than not. I was right, I usually am. Violet. He read it twice. He went and found Miss Paget, who was Rosalind now, in private, though she still signed the Monday reports with her full name out of what he had come to understand was professional habit rather than formality, and showed her the document. She read it again. Something moved in her expression, the specific private warmth she reserved for moments she had not expected to find as good as they were. She calculated, Rosalind said. Since the second Friday, he confirmed. She never said anything. She was waiting, he said, for the formal occasion to present her findings. Rosalind looked at the document again, at the final line. I was right. I usually am. She looked up at him, he looked back. He thought 12 interviews. He thought the 13th arrived 20 minutes early and went into the East Garden. He thought 4 minutes, and the truest thing, and a mason's mark that no one had thought to look for. He thought, I was looking all that time, and I did not know what I was looking for until she told me. Mr. Radcliffe received the formal notification of the revised household arrangement with the composed satisfaction of a man who had filed a one-line agency note 3 months ago and had been privately correct about it ever since. He produced the amended household ledger on a Monday morning and placed it on Lord Trelawney's desk. The entry read, in Mr. Radcliffe's precise handwriting, Position of Viscountess of Moorfield. Responsibilities to include estate consultation, schoolroom oversight, Friday dinners, Mason's Mark research, ongoing, and the correction of the Viscount as required. Lord Trelawney looked up. Mr. Radcliffe maintained the neutral expression he had perfected over 22 years. Shall I file it, my lord? File it, said Lord Trelawney. Mr. Radcliffe filed it. And that, my dear friends, is the story of 12 interviews and a 13th that lasted 16 minutes in a garden before it ever began in a study. That is the story of a man who described his daughter wrong for 14 months, and a woman who went in through the East Garden gate because she was curious, and the interview was not for another 20 minutes. And curiosity, she had long since decided, was always worth the time. If you have been sitting with me through all of it, and I hope you have, I ask only one small thing in return. Find the subscribe button, leave a comment below and tell me what you thought of Violet, because I suspect she is your favorite character in this story, and she should be. And come back, the fire will be lit. I will always have another story for you. Moorfield Hall was quiet that evening, as it had not been quiet in 3 years. It was the quiet of a house that was being looked after properly. Not managed, not administered, but genuinely looked after, by people who had found that paying attention to the right things produced results that could not be planned in advance and did not need to be. Violet was in the East Garden with her notebook. She had found a new set of initials, lower down on the wall, and she had a theory. She was, as she had noted in her formal submission, usually right.